out, and we greatly appreciate it. All right, we're going to move to our trending topic, which is the psychology of Joaquin Phoenix. And as you probably know, Joaquin has the movie The Joker coming out. It won one of the big awards at the Toronto International Film Festival. It is already getting Oscar buzz for him and the film. You probably know that Joaquin is a 3-time Oscar nominee already, that he and his brother River are the only two siblings that have ever been Oscar nominated. And so he is a amazing actor, but with a psychologically rich history. And so we want to dive into some of his psychology, look at his rocky childhood, the loss of his brother Phoenix, and how all this has shaped his career and his life.
The loss of his brother Phoenix.
I mean, River. Sorry.
River.
Man,
I think I'm stroking out right now.
I think
you're stroking out.
I'd appreciate it if anybody listening would just page 911 for me right now.
Oh my God.
Paige?
Yeah. Who's going to put on a beeper?
Send a Western Union.
I now
1984 called him once its pager
I
back.
now feel like I'm Joe Biden. Put the record player on.
Put it on the record player and send some social workers into
So
your house.
ridiculous.
All right.
Page 911.
The record player. All right. But with that, we're going to talk about Joaquin Phoenix. So anybody want to cue it up in terms of his history, his early history with his family? I actually know a fair amount about this, but anybody else want to kind of lead off and talk about his early growing up? Frank?
I was fascinated to learn about his travels, where he was born, his time with his dad, moving around, the names of his siblings, changing the last name of their family from, what was it?
Bottom,
not Bud.
Wow.
Yeah. Either way.
My name is River Bottom.
River Bottom.
River Butt.
But just seeing this whole process of identity and figuring out who he's going to be and traveling South America. I mean, the guy's fascinating. Mm-hmm. And I feel now that I know some of his history and I go back through the different roles I've seen him play, even going back to the movie Signs, which everybody judges me for this, but I love that movie, that he's I would imagine he's been in so many different situations that he had to sort of mold himself into his surroundings, which is a natural way of learning to act. But I didn't know any of that stuff about him. It was fascinating.
Well, someone want to fill in some of those details of his early family?
So they moved back to the United States when he was about 6.
From Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico.
Yes. And so one of the things that is a big part of the narrative is this cult that his family was part of, Children of God. And when he's been interviewed about it, everything I've gathered, they've talked about how his parents didn't really quite understand that's what it was until it was obvious that that's what it was, and that's when they got out. So then he changed his name from Leaf to Joaquin back when he was 15. And I'm jumping ahead here. There's a lot of things. His brother passed away when he was 19, died of an overdose Halloween. And what was that, like 93 or something?
Yep.
The first movie that I saw him in that I was still obsessed with, is Gladiator. It's one of my favorite movies, hands down. Good. He went to rehab in 2005 for alcoholism. He has been in tons of incredible movies. Walk the Line, won a Grammy for his vocal performance on that. So, I mean, he's just really been around this industry for so long, and he's interesting.
And has been in a lot of relationships.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that early family, because I think that's going to set the stage for a lot of the other content we're going to talk about. He was in a family that was part of this religious cult, and the cult was in many ways extraordinarily weird. The sexual boundaries were very odd, including with the kids. The way that kids were raised. Jonathan, anything about that you want to comment on about what that early childhood experience was probably like for him and the impact that that's had.
Well, it's really hard to speculate. I mean, there's very little that he's mentioned about it other than he really doesn't talk about it much, or as far as I can tell, in really negative terms. And I think either that's something that he really was shielded by, and that his parents, as soon as they really became more exposed to some of the more troubling aspects of it, really removed the family and moved on, because they did seem like, I mean, modern day gypsy troubadours that just were kind of like, you know,
Yeah,
so
that's what it was. They perform on the street.
So it'd be really easy for us to, that sort of stands out, but for him, it may have really just been a normal thing, that everything is just sort of up in the air, you know, in that regard. There was a huge, I mean, one of the things that it seemed like his parents were always trying to create a sense of community and belonging, and yet it sounds like them as a family had really strong familial ties. And so I think that part of what maybe has shielded him from it, if what he's saying is really kind of his overall experience, so that he doesn't really remember anything particularly impactful or negative about that time of his life being exposed to children of God, is that I think he is one of 6, and then he has a 7th half sibling. I think his father had a
half sister.
Excuse me, so. I mean, they're really close in age. They all were performers. They all just seemed like to have really radiating personalities, or that chameleon adaptability. And I think they probably really helped each other get through that by sticking together and shield it in that way.
If you want to know more about the family, I would recommend a book for you called The Last Night at the Viper Room. And it is about the death of his brother, River Phoenix. And they talk about the background, the history. There's a lot more detail. It's one of my favorite biographies I've ever read. And that's transition to the next thing about this that I want to talk about in terms of his history and story. And that is when he was 19 years old, he was with his brother River at the Viper Room, which is on Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles, owned by Johnny Depp. I think, pretty sure it had just opened. It was a fairly recent open of the Viper Room. It hadn't been around for a while, at least in that form. And River overdosed in the club, went outside and convulsed on the sidewalk, and died basically on the sidewalk in front of right there on Hollywood Boulevard. Joaquin was the one who tried to help him, called the police, was the person that was like really in the middle of all that. Obviously, we're speculating, but what do you think the impact of that kind of experience, and as best we can tell, they were close, would have on him in terms of his life and trajectory?
I mean, when you think about losing a sibling, it is devastating. It seems like they were really close. And like you're saying, we can't really speculate, but thinking about going through that sort of loss and then having that be so public, it just feels so wrong to me, where it's like you can't be allowed to appropriately grieve because there are these other things that are happening in your life where, like, I've never listened to it, but I know, like, the media they've released the audio of the 911.
Well,
and I'm like, why do we do that?
And there are pictures of the event on the sidewalk.
Oh, that's right. And I think somebody broke in to take photos of his brother's body.
They did, right?
I mean, just like horrible stuff. And so, I mean, regardless of who you are, when you experience the death of a loved one, there is a void and a hole that's always there, and you always think about them. And I think that's where faith and spirituality has to come in. And I don't know what his beliefs are, but he seems to have taken time off after that to try to process.
Well, it seems like that's a pattern for him too. And I don't know how much it's related to that or his childhood, but he seems to appear and then disappear, appear and disappear. And I don't know if that also relates to his various relationships. I know Hollywood has all these, you're with somebody and then not, and with somebody and then not. But whether this speaks to his level of openness and not getting hurt again in that way, because that's a trauma and a half right there, and just being a private person.
And I mean, again, we are just kind of speculating based upon what we know and what's out there in the public's eye. But I got to think he's an incredibly brave person. I mean, he took time away. He was really young. He had already started a moderately successful acting career up till that point. I mean, he was in Parenthood. He was in a movie called Ruskies. I remember seeing that.
Yeah.
Back when he was Leif Phoenix. And he took some time off, and he made a conscious decision to really pursue acting as an adult. And that's something that he's got a really strong track record with working with really creative and artistic people. So he's not doing it for money or fame. He's immensely talented. He surrounds himself with talented people. At times, he kind of comes across as an intense person, but I wouldn't blame him if that's really just kind of guardedness or jadedness towards the industry. And yet he knows that, and he chose to really pursue that career and calling. So there's clearly a level of meaningfulness and purpose that he finds only through acting and performing.
Which probably is related to his brother as well, is pursuing that with the memory of his brother and what his brother could have possibly done.
And for those who don't know River Phoenix, I would say there are really only two celebrity deaths that really personally affected me. One was Robin Williams. The second was River Phoenix. And the reason River Phoenix death hit me is because I felt like he was the defining and best actor of his generation. Like it was, there was no question he was the Marlon Brando of his generation. And the two actors, by the way, that I would say were head and shoulders above the others, at least at the time when they died, of that generation, River and also Heath Ledger, both died of drug overdoses. So River's this extraordinary, I mean, already had been Oscar nominated, was like Joaquin is now, committed to working with highly creative directors and writers. So the loss of River on kind of a big picture level is huge, but you think for him personally, the impact of losing him on that personal level. And like Jonathan's saying, you see the trajectory for him of being committed to the art and being a really extraordinary actor. And so you can see how that sort of shows up in his movie choices and his career path. What do you guys think for him now, though, as an adult and the kind of the road he's traveled? How would you understand him in terms of all the things we've talked about, including the fact that he struggled with alcoholism and all that? How that all comes together now in the kind of person that, and again, some of it's speculation. We don't know all this, but from what we do know, the kind of person that he is now. Any thoughts about him as a professional and as a person?
I mean, we've obviously hit on his immense talent, but I can't help but think of this notion of grit, right? So there's a construct, Angela Duckworth, and it's just this notion of persevering, and you have this ultimate goal that kind of organizes and pushes you and guides you to make different choices, and it really gives you more meaning. And I think, as you said earlier, it's the art. That is his meaning. So when he did the movie with Casey Affleck, there was a lot of risk involved with that, to go on David Letterman. If anybody hasn't seen that interview, it's bananas, where he is just really out there, seems very detached from reality. And it was all a ruse. I mean, he thought, I'm going to just do this. Let's go big or go home. And there's a huge personal risk where his career could have gone in the toilet because of that. And so I think he just has this quality of grit about him that's to be admired.
I wouldn't be shocked if he, even as an adult and later on, has really had to work on continued identity formation, as well as boundaries. I mean, that type of childhood, being a troubadour, a gypsy, having a lot of blurred understandings of enmeshment and just sexual boundary, and I don't know what he may have been impacted on, but just that lack of boundaries. And then you go into a profession where it's all about losing yourself and immersing yourself into this other role. To me, that's just, it's so fascinating to think about, but I could also see how some people, that would be a really difficult transformation to just sort of go in and come out. You hear about some actors that it's a job. They're on cue, they perform, and then they clock out and they go home, and they have that ability to detach. I'm curious what it's going to be like for him. I've heard interviews about this Joker film, and he talked about he and Todd Phillips, the director, they wanted to not be beholden to the origin story of Joker because they wanted, and he's speaking to us, he probably would laugh at us doing an episode on him. He doesn't want psychologists to be able to diagnose or understand the motive and background of this Joker. Mm-hmm. And so there's something, I think, even for him of wanting to be classified or diagnosed or pinned down. And to me, that speaks to that identity formation as well as not wanting boundaries and predictability.
Well, and I have to add to that, and I think this is important, because one of the things that he commented on in an interview was how, I think it was Dr. Drew, there's somebody after the David Letterman interview, I think Dr. Drew, Dr. Phil, I don't know, somebody actually came out and diagnosed him. And it's ethically, as psychologists, we would never diagnose. So here we are talking about him. And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with what we're doing. We're just commenting and we are speculating, but we're trying to educate. And I think what I feel or sense from that comment that Hedderly just made was he really doesn't want people to be able to do that. He wants to confuse. He likes to have, the uncertainty, the unknown. And I just think that it speaks to who he is.
Yeah, and this is an aside, but Heath Ledger's role in the Joker is one of my most favorite performances of all time. And when he died, that was just brutal. But then when I saw that Joaquin was going to be playing the Joker, I just had this bad feeling. It just and then when I saw the trailers for it, it's just it's almost like you play this role and these actors that go just full into character that it's almost you think that particular character Joker makes you go crazy and how that's got to take a serious toll on you. So I'm very interested to see how he approaches potential Oscar nominations given his he called the Oscars BS, but then came back and said it was a worthy thing. But I think that would be another identity moment for him to say, is he going to embrace that kind of a nomination? Is he going to just accept that, or how he approaches that moment?
Well, and one thing that I will say just to wrap this up is with all this that we're talking about, one of the things we're agreed on is that this is a very resilient guy who has gone through a very unusual childhood, an incredible trauma that's among the worst traumas you could go through, and other struggles in life like alcoholism, and yet has forged not only a professional career that is unreal and unbelievable and so good, but also just has kept himself in a spot where he seems like he's got a life that is meaningful to him. So this is a guy that I think we have some admiration for, not just for his talent, but how he's been able to navigate all this stuff. It's been very cool, and we're wishing him well. If you have thoughts, we'd like for you to let us know by tweeting us at @shrink_tank or write us at feedback@shrinktank.com. Our final segment is something that we call our doctor's orders, and these are things that we're personally enjoying in pop culture. We'll start with Emma Kate.
So obviously I binge Netflix like all of us, but there was a great series that I discovered called The Mind Explained. Mm-hmm. And they're very short, brief, awesome information on memory, dreams, anxiety, mindfulness, psychedelics, and it all is coming through the lens of meditation. And this is an area of personal interest and research that I've gone into, and it is very, very informative. So check it out.
And Frank.
I would like to recommend Stephen King's new book, The Institute. And think of well, not exactly the opening, but a little boy whose parents are murdered. The boy is thrown into a black SUV and taken to a secret location where his childhood bedroom is replicated exactly, and the kids at the school have various secret powers.
Jonathan.
This is a wonderful time for me, David, because my favorite band is slowly rolling out songs from its upcoming album. I'm talking about Wilco, and they have an album dropping in October called Ode to Joy. They now have 2 songs out. You can find them. One's called Love is Everywhere, Beware, and the other song is called Everyone Hides. They've described this as sort of a folk rock meditation on the state of our nation and how to try to find something positive to look in the midst of turmoil. And I'm really excited, Dave, because come October, I'm going to be heading to your neck of the woods, Nashville, to introduce you to Wilco live at the Grand Ole Opry.
Oh, wow. At the Grand. That's fantastic.
Yep. Can't wait.
Jeez.
We have our tickets. And I'm going to recommend a documentary by Ken Burns called Country Music. And I'm not a big country music fan, but I'm a big Ken Burns fan, and I'm a big music fan. And anybody who loves music should watch this thing. It talks about the history of country music. It sort of weaves together the influences. It's got interviews with everybody from Dolly Parton, Merle Haggard. It is really captivating. Highly recommended. It's on NPR right now. It is, or PBS right now. Ken Burns Country Music.
It's 16 hours long.
Yeah.
I love it.
And for someone who doesn't like country music, it's a great thing that you live in Nashville.
Hey, and you mentioned Dolly Parton.
And that's it for this episode of the Shrink Tank Podcast.
She bought
No,
local
we're stopping. Trust me, everyone. I need to stop Frank on this.
You're welcome.
Yes, you're welcome, everybody. And that is going to do it for this edition of the Shrink Tank Podcast. For Emma Kate Wright, Jonathan Hedderly, and Frank Gaskell in Charlotte, I'm Dave Verhagen in Nashville, home of country music. Tell all your friends about us and make it a great week.